All right, what's up, everybody? Live edition here of Locked On Heat. We're taking all of your free agency questions right after this.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat. It's a live edition here on YouTube, doing this 4:30 Eastern time on Monday, about an hour and a half before the start of free agency, the official start of free agency, at least. A lot of stuff has already gotten done here, and we're going to cover a bunch of it here within the next half hour, 45 minutes, as a little bit more of an updated primer as we get set for the official start of free agency here. But I wanted to open it up first to questions. So if you're watching live, go ahead and submit your questions in the chat, in the live chat. I'll try to get to as many of them as I can. I already put out a call to the Locked On Heat Insider community over on Subtext. If you ever want to join that, you could do that with the link in the show notes that we include to every episode. So I want to get to some of the answers that I've already provided. Some of our Subtext subscribers, our Locked On Heat Insider subscribers here. And if you have a question, go ahead again, leave it in the live stream. I'll try to get to them as many as I can here before we run out of time. But I want to start with this one from Kevin, who wrote in to the Locked On Heat Insider community. What are the chances that a Heat deal with Jonathan Kuminga materializes quickly after free agency opens? Kuminga, okay. Quickly is the key word that I'm going to take from that question. The chances that something happens quickly with Jonathan Kuminga, probably not. This is more of a slow developing situation for a few different reasons. Number one, Kuminga's a restricted free agent. If he was going to move teams, if he was going to end up in Miami, these things are really complicated. The Warriors have experience dealing with complicated sign and trades involving multiple teams. I think any Kuminga deal to Miami would more than likely involve multiple teams, although there are ways to get it done without it. But it's very difficult, and it might not be something Miami wants to do in terms of getting rid of certain pieces and whatever. But the Warriors did a complicated sign and trade to send Klay Thompson to Dallas last summer, and that opened up the cap space for them to go out and sign Buddy Hield and D'Anthony Melton and a bunch of these other things that they did. So they're experienced in it. Miami hasn't really dealt with a complicated sign and trade where they've acquired a player in quite some time. We remember that they signed and traded away Max Strus a couple of summers ago to Cleveland, and they got a couple of second-round picks. That might be more in line of what ends up happening with Duncan Robinson. We're going to put a pin in the Duncan Robinson situation here in a second. So because it's so complicated, these things just tend to move slowly because a lot of pieces have to be moved around, and you have to get potentially multiple teams on the phone, and they might have other things to do in free agency as it opens. Golden State might have other things to do as free agency opens, other priorities that they're trying to do first before they deal with the Jonathan Kuminga thing. And that's not even going into the whole part of Miami has not officially been allowed to negotiate with Jonathan Kuminga. So the Warriors have tendered Jonathan Kuminga his qualifying offer. He is officially a restricted free agent. Miami would still, in order to negotiate the sign and trade, have to make an offer to Jonathan Kuminga, and then kind of get into the sign and trade business with the idea, obviously, that it would be eventually a sign and trade, but talking with his representation and saying, hey, if we could get a sign and trade done, what's the number that makes sense for you guys? Because Kuminga would still have to sign a new contract. So I would be very surprised if that moved quickly. Now, I will say this. The Heat have had interest in Jonathan Kuminga. It's been reported in a lot of different places. I do think that the interest is legitimate. I think that they are legitimately interested in Jonathan Kuminga. It does not mean that they are for sure going after Jonathan Kuminga or that they're even necessarily making Kuminga their number one priority. It just means that there is legitimate interest, and they have thought about what a roster would look like with Kuminga on it, with Tyler Hero, and with Bam Adebayo, and what that looks like in terms of their timetable, especially after not getting Kevin Durant. I do think that Miami is looking more at going in a younger direction. And I think that was part of the calculus in not offering everything for Kevin Durant a week ago. So we'll see what happens with Kuminga. Anthony Slater from The Athletic reported that Miami is interested again. I think this is 20 minutes ago or so. Not only Miami, though, but the Chicago Bulls are another team that could get involved in Jonathan Kuminga. I would suspect that we might hear from another team or two on the Kuminga front. I just don't anticipate this happening today. This might be something that happens this week. But I do think that there's going to be more reporting on this, and we'll continue to hear more stuff on this. But it's just, there's so many moving pieces that it's just hard to imagine this happening quickly with Jonathan Kuminga. But that doesn't mean that we won't hear something on that front between now and when something ultimately does happen. So that's the first question from the subtext community. Let's go with this question from Malachi, who writes in, what are these rumors about John Collins to the Heat I've been seeing a lot about? Any truth? I'd love to see him in Miami. Miami has liked John Collins in the past. I saw the report also. I can't recall where it's from. There's so many reports going on right now that's hard to keep track, but they have liked Collins in the past. I don't know that he's a fit necessarily for this roster. The one thing, because you have Bam, because you have Kel'el Ware, and because you have Nikola Jovic, who this team is clearly still committed to in some shape or form, I do think that Collins could make sense as another big who could potentially play with Bam and with Ware. And if this team, if certain things happen this offseason and Miami ends up playing Nikola Jovic a little bit more at the 3, and maybe they eventually move Nico into more of a 3-4 as opposed to a 4-5, then that does open up some avenues for Collins. I do think that this team has a need for another big man, potentially. Now, maybe I was always thinking maybe more of a veteran traditional center just to back up Kel'el Ware and make it so that you're not always relying on Kevin Love as that other backup center. But Collins, although it's not a perfect fit and he is expensive, he's about $26 million. What's interesting about Collins is that his contract is expiring. And Miami, as we know, doesn't want to take on a lot of long-term money. They don't want to take on a lot of additional 2026 money. And the fact that Collins' contract expires at the end of the season, even if he's overpaid right now in terms of a reserve big role, on the flip side, you walk away from the contract at the end of the season. So how could that happen? Two ways that I see Collins potentially happening. And again, no indication that this is happening. I think Jake Fisher said something about, oh, that's where it was from. I forgot. Now I just remembered. Funny how that happens. I think Jake Fisher said it on his Bleacher Report stream that they had been interested in John Collins. So that's all I've seen of this. And I don't even know when that was. So maybe that was true and is no longer true, whatever. But in terms of the mechanics of how John Collins ends up in Miami, here's how it would happen hypothetically. Two ways. They just swapped Terry Rozier for John Collins. Now, I don't see Utah doing that because it doesn't make any sense for them. They're actively shedding point guards, right? They just bought out Jordan Clarkson. They just traded away Colin Sexton to Charlotte for Nurkic in a very strange trade. It feels like something's happening in Utah. Like Windhorse fingers up in the air. Like, I don't know what's going on there, but it feels like something more is happening in Utah. So I don't know if that has anything to do with Miami, but it is something to monitor because when Utah does stuff, it tends to affect a lot of different teams and have a domino effect on stuff. But that's why I don't see a Rozier for Collins swap. One problem for another problem potentially there. I don't see that as viable because, again, Utah is actively trying to shed point guards because they're trying to give a lot more playing time to the young point guards currently on their roster. So that's one way. The other way is a trade involving Andrew Wiggins going to Utah for John Collins. I don't think Miami would do that straight up, even if they're looking to shed Wiggins' long-term contract. Wiggins has another year left on his deal next year. It's a player option. I think most people anticipate Wiggins to exercise that player option and enter free agency next year, only because, not necessarily because he wants to leave Miami. I do think that the reports or whatever these rumors are of Wiggins hates it here in Miami, I think those are vastly overstated. But because there's going to be a lot of money in that summer, and it would make sense when Wiggins is young to lock in another long-term deal. He's at $30 million next year. Based on where the CBA is and the salary cap is, that's probably his floor next year as a free agent. So I would imagine he would just opt out and sign a longer-term contract with more security and more guaranteed money. But that would allow Miami, if Andrew Wiggins opts out, to just walk away from Andrew Wiggins if they need that cap space for some sort of other move in 2026. So I don't think Miami is super motivated just to move Andrew Wiggins, just to move him. That's kind of what the point I'm getting to. So I don't see Miami just being like, hey, look, we'll give you Wiggins for John Collins straight up. It's an upgrade for you, Utah. We get off of the long-term, quote-unquote long-term money. Again, player option for next season for Wiggins. I don't think they do it. I don't think Miami would do it. Now, would Utah include draft capital? Would they include other assets? That could get interesting if you're Miami. That's the John Collins part of this. Again, nothing imminent on that front. It was just a rumor that's out there, something I've been asked about quite a few times. So I at least wanted to address it. So those were all theoretical. That was not reported. That was just the theoretical mechanics of how Collins could end up in Miami. Miguel writes in, we need a backup center. How about Clint Capella? Looks like Capella is going to go somewhere else where there's more guaranteed playing time, potentially even a starting job. The Lakers have been interested in him, and that's been reported, and that's been out there. The Clippers have been reported. The Spurs have been reported as interested in Clint Capella. I would be surprised if Clint Capella ends up in Miami. That just doesn't seem like it's a top priority for the Heat, and it feels like Capella is one of these guys who could get signed within a couple of hours of free agency actually beginning. So I don't see that happening. Seth Curry is David Ramil's one of his favorite offseason targets. If Duncan Robinson does move on, then I could see Seth Curry as somebody that could potentially be involved there. Luke Kennard, another free agent. I think he might not be in Miami's wheelhouse, although if Duncan leaves, I could see them maybe making a call on Luke Kennard. Tim Hardaway Jr. is another guy potentially. But, these are all options if Duncan Robinson leaves. While we're on Duncan Robinson, I've talked around it enough. I'll talk Duncan Robinson, and then I'm going to start getting to some of these questions here in the live chat. So if you're watching on YouTube, thanks for tuning in here on Locked On Heat. Continue to send those questions in. I see them coming in. I'm not ignoring them. I just wanted to get some of these other prearranged questions out of the way before I started tackling those. So get those questions in now if you're on the live chat. Duncan Robinson, the latest on him. The Detroit Pistons have emerged as a suitor, according to multiple reports, for Duncan Robinson. This always made sense. I think I mentioned it on the Sunday show. I don't remember if I did, but as soon as the Malik Beasley stuff happened and they were closing in on, I think it was a 3-year, $42 million deal with Beasley, and then all of this stuff was discovered about the probe into Beasley's potential gambling on games a couple of years ago. They are not going to sign him. That leaves open, like there's a need for three-point shooting now in Detroit. Malik Beasley is incredibly important. I think I would have voted him for Sixth Man of the Year if I had a ballot last year. Like, he was incredibly important for them last year. There's a clear need for an elite three-point shooter. Duncan Robinson clearly fits that. He is a free agent. If they were to offer him that same deal that they were going to offer to Beasley, that would be very competitive. And so I do think Duncan Robinson to Detroit is a very real possibility. It does not mean that it's been ruled out that Duncan Robinson can return to Miami. Miami currently $11.6 million under the luxury tax. So when we're talking about Miami's finances, this goes for Duncan Robinson and everything else that they were doing here. This is a very important point to remember before we do anything else here, folks. Miami will not pay the luxury tax this year unless they believe they are a title-winning team. And it's hard to see a move on the table right now that vaults them from where they are now to a title-contending team. They even decided that Kevin Durant wouldn't get them there. So as soon as they made that decision, it kind of became clear, yeah, we're probably going to take a little bit of a step back, step sideways, whatever. We're not necessarily going all in on this season. They want to avoid the luxury tax, not just because of Mick Harrison's pockets, but also because it avoids the repeater tax on the luxury stuff and like that, and some of the issues that come with team building strategy after that. So it makes a lot of sense for Miami to duck the luxury tax this year. So they're about $11.6 million under the luxury tax line. They're a little bit more under the first apron, a lot more under the second apron. This is not a team that necessarily has to worry about the first apron or the second apron. Why does that matter? Because if they do elect to use a mid-level exception, the full mid-level exception or something like that, that technically hard caps them at the first apron. But again, I don't see them even getting close to that number, so I don't really care about that. You're going to hear potentially about, oh, Miami, if they do this, they'll be hard capped. If they do a sign and trade for Kuminga, they'll be hard capped. I don't really care about that. I don't anticipate them wanting to spend that much money up to that hard cap anyway. So that is almost immaterial to me. The only reason that could matter is if by the trade deadline, let's say Miami is better than they expected and Giannis decides, you know what, I actually do want to leave Milwaukee, again, hypothetical or whatever, then any sort of hard caps potentially become an issue at that point. But right now, I don't think it's something Miami's worried about necessarily. Certainly not on the top of their list. So if they were going to bring back Duncan Robinson, who declined, he exercised his early termination option to become an unrestricted free agent. He gave up $9.9 million in guaranteed money by doing that. He has to have some sort of indication that he's going to be making up that money pretty quickly and that he's going to be able to also lock in long-term security with a 2, 3, 4-year deal, something like that. That goes beyond this season. That could be from Miami. Miami could just offer him what they were going to give him on a guaranteed deal, maybe even a little bit more. Bump it up to 10, 11, 10 and a half, $11 million and give him another 2 years on top of that so that he locks in some guaranteed security, some long-term security there. I could see that happening. I could see the same offer coming from Detroit or another team that's in need of shooting. So Duncan Robinson is going to be a really interesting player to watch here. If Miami does bring back Duncan Robinson, they'll be at 15 players. That'll be it. So the only way to make a move at that point would be via trade or potentially to create a roster spot in another way. And I'm only going to bring this up. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because I've done zero reporting on this specific issue. It's something I literally had just thought about before I started this live stream. Let's say Miami does bring back Duncan Robinson on a team-friendly deal. And they're at 15 players. And they decide, you know what? We still want to go and be a player in free agency. Or maybe it's not Duncan Robinson. Let's say Duncan Robinson signs with Detroit. They replace him with Tim Hardaway Jr. on a veteran minimum, for example. And they still want to open up a roster spot for somebody else. You're seeing a lot of buyouts lately with DeAndre Ayton and Jordan Clarkson. I wonder if this team would just say, look, we're $11.6 million under the luxury tax line. We could just buy out Terry Rozier, not have to concern ourselves with maybe finding playing time, maybe not. Maybe we're just over this experience. Just take the L on it. We traded a first-round pick for him. It sucks, but we're taking the L. They could potentially buy out Rozier and open up a roster spot and still use a portion of the mid-level exception to add a player to the roster, plus somebody on like a veteran minimum or something like that, or the biannual exception or the trade exception or whatever. But they could basically sign, if they bought out Terry Rozier, and maybe if Terry Rozier was willing to give up some money, they could open up another $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, which wouldn't be a lot, but it could potentially get them all the way up to the full mid-level of about $14.1 million, as opposed to a little bit less than that than they can use right now in order to stay under the luxury tax. That I'm gonna leave it there because I don't want this to get aggregated or people to go crazy on this. It's just a thought I had. Again, zero reporting on it. It was a thought I had right before the live stream, but it is technically feasible that Miami could do it that way. All right, I want to get to some of our live questions here. This one comes from Jamal. How do you feel about Nickeil Alexander-Walker? Should the Heat target him in free agency? So there was a report, again, can't remember where it was from, that that Miami was interested on Nickeil Alexander-Walker and that they were, being mentioned by rival teams as a potential suitor. I love Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I would love him for Miami. He's exactly the type of player that this team doesn't have. Once you get past obviously the Heat have a need for a superstar scorer, a guy who can lead your offense and do all of these things. We know that. Okay, you get past that. What else does Miami need? They need real depth, two-way players, high-end rotation players. Nickeil Alexander-Walker can play in the playoffs. He guarded Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the Western Conference Finals. This guy can play. He could play both sides. He could shoot threes. He's got some off-the-dribble pop. Got some playmaking stuff. Miami doesn't have a traditional point guard on the roster necessarily that they trust for big minutes. Maybe Davion Mitchell is the closest. I wouldn't even consider Davion Mitchell like a traditional point guard. He's sort of still figuring that part of his game out on the offensive end. But could you put Alexander Walker and Tyler Hero in your backcourt and just say it's kind of a committee thing? Sure, why not? Start two kind of combo guards as opposed to one point guard and one shooting guard. You could go ahead and start two combo guards. Or Nickeil Alexander-Walker as your sixth man coming off the bench. You start Kel'el Ware and Bam Adebayo plus, let's call it Andrew Wiggins for now, Davion Mitchell, Tyler Hero. Alexander Walker can come in and play that swing spot while Bam or Kel'el Ware plays the five and the other one's on the bench. I think it makes a lot of sense as a sixth man. I love him. He would be my number one target. Him, and not including any of the restricted free agents. Right? I'm not talking about Kuminga. I'm not talking about Santi Aldama, which might be another name worth monitoring there. But in terms of unrestricted free agents, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, that's a dude. That's a guy who could play in the playoffs, a high-level rotation player that Miami just doesn't have enough of. They don't have enough high-end two-way rotation players. And if Miami's not going to go get that star, I think they should be trying to add at least 2 high-end rotation players when free agency begins, whether it's free agency, trade, whatever it might be, players who fit a little bit better with what they're trying to do and can play legitimate minutes in the playoffs. Just be deep. If you're not going to have a star, be as deep as possible. And these are also the kinds of players who you can use now, or you can sign now and use in a trade later, right? Indiana signed Bruce Brown as an unrestricted free agent a couple of summers ago. By the trade deadline, they were using Bruce Brown as the key salary piece, plus 3 first-round picks to go get Pascal Siakam. Next thing you know, they're in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then this past season, obviously, they were in the NBA Finals. So these are the kinds of things that might not seem like a big deal to some fans now, but could set up future moves later. And we've even seen Miami do this in the past with guys like Dion Waiters, James Johnson, all these guys who we pretty much said super good players, rotation guys on tradable contracts. I think he was a little too high on them as rotation players, but ultimately he was right, and it ended up starting the Jimmy Butler era. So do I like Nickeil Alexander-Walker? Yes, I do a lot. Will we do anything today? From Richard Cunningham. I don't know that Miami will. I think they would like to do something today. But I think we will learn more about what Miami will look like today. The first thing I'm looking at is Duncan Robinson, and then what happens after that. I'm not going to rule out something surprising happening here with Miami. The Jonathan Kuminga stuff, again, I think that's more slow moving. I don't think they've been linked to DeMar DeRozan a ton over the last couple months. Wiggins for DeMar DeRozan makes a lot of theoretical sense for both the Sacramento Kings and the Miami Heat. I don't know that that's something that gets done right away. I don't know that that's something that gets done today, but perhaps it is, right? Maybe Miami just says DeRozan's our guy. Again, I'm not sure that is something that happens today. So will they do something today? I don't know, but I think we'll get some more insight on what it ends up happening here. All right, we already talked about the Rozier thing. What are your thoughts on Rozier for Jaden Hardy? Gets off Rozier's contract while Dallas gets. It doesn't work salary matching purposes. I'm not sure that works. Dallas would have to throw some other things in, and I don't know that they want to do that in terms of what Dallas was looking for. Cody Martin I just saw somebody ask about Caleb Martin or mention Caleb Martin. Cody Martin was bought out by the Phoenix Suns. He had a non-guaranteed contract. They're trying to clear up that roster spot and save some money potentially there. Miami likes Cody Martin. Cody Martin likes Miami. That could be something to watch, but again, I'm not sure that's a today thing. So there it is on that. Ayton is garbage. Why do we keep talking themselves in the draft? I would be surprised if DeAndre Ayton landed in Miami. DeAndre Ayton feels more of like a Lakers thing to me, if I were just to guess, because there's such a need there, because they have playing time. DeAndre Ayton he's big. He's a big name, former #1 pick. You could say, oh, wow, he would be such a great backup center. I don't know that DeAndre Ayton has much interest in being a backup center. And it doesn't mean that he's going to find a starting job somewhere else. But if I'm Miami, I'm very happy with Khalil Ware. I'm very happy with Bam Adebayo. And I kind of want one of those guys at center for all 48 minutes, right? You start with Bam and Ware probably this coming season. Bam, Ware comes off the floor. Bam moves to center. Bam goes to the bench. Ware comes back in at center. That doesn't leave a ton of minutes for center. So I wouldn't be investing a ton in that backup spot, although I would like another option there besides Kevin Love there. Al Horford, $11 million. Is that too much for a vet backup center? He's old, but he's good space. I would love Al Horford in Miami. I think that'd be a great addition. $11 million would be too much. I don't know that he's even going to get that much. Who knows? But Golden State has emerged as a team that's going to chase Al Horford a lot. And what Golden State and Boston can offer Al Horford, because Boston very much in the mix to bring Al Horford back, even though they're trying to save money here. I've heard that the Celtics could be trying to flip Anthony Simons again. Sam Hauser is somebody who could get traded. By the way, if Miami loses Duncan Robinson and is looking to replace Duncan Robinson with a similar type of player, they have a trade exception, and Sam Hauser fits that trade exception created by the Jimmy Butler situation. They also have a mid-level exception. They have multiple avenues in which to just absorb Sam Hauser. And if they do that, he's making $10 million next year. That would still fit under the luxury tax. And Miami would be doing Boston a favor there, technically, because it would be saving Boston $10 million against their cap. And they're trying to reduce payroll still here, too. So Sam Hauser is somebody who I've circled as a potential option for Miami if they're looking to replace Duncan Robinson with a similar player. But in terms of Horford, Boston's still trying to bring him back. Golden State's very interested. Golden State and Boston can both offer Al Horford a starting job, and that's not something Miami necessarily can offer unless they feel like, hey, Horford, you're going to start, and we're going to start bringing Khalil Ware off the bench. I don't know that makes as much sense for a team that is clearly trying to trend younger here, potentially. Had they made the Kevin Durant trade, then that makes a little bit more sense. But they didn't make the Kevin Durant trade. They're not going in that older direction, so I don't really see Horford to Miami being a thing. Florida Boy says Danny Ainge ain't doing a deal with Miami. That used to be a thing. I don't think it's a thing anymore. Let's see here. Kuminga or Bobby Portis? Bobby Portis re-signed with Milwaukee, so that's not going to be an option anymore. I don't know. Did I miss something on Jaden Hardy? I've gotten a few questions on him. Pass. I'm passing him. What do you think of Jordan Clarkson as a pickup? I like Jordan Clarkson. I think he's a vet, clear, high-end ball handler, has a real live dribble, microwave scorer, the kind of player who's not going to fix all of Miami's problems, but when Tyler Hero goes to the bench, and if they move on from Terry Rozier in some way, or even if they don't, maybe, that makes a lot of sense as a guy who could just soak up some minutes and score some points when this team is in need of it. I think Jordan Clarkson would love to be in Miami. Just a thought, but I don't know that that's necessarily the top priority for Miami. I don't know what the market is for Jordan Clarkson either. Where are we at maybe getting DeMar DeRozan? I talked about this a second ago, but not something that I think is going to happen today. I think this is something that both teams could revisit if other things fall through. I have no idea what the hardest part here is figuring out what Sacramento wants to do. They seem to be a team that everybody was like, watch out for them on draft night. They're going to be making a bunch of moves. Look at them to be starting moving into the draft and start moving players and stuff, and they did nothing. So I think there's a lot of talk coming out of Sacramento with very little bite, right? Very little action. I think Sacramento likes to talk about maybe playing a big game, and at the end of the day, I don't know what they're going to do. I think they're extremely motivated to do something, but I also think that there may be a front office that's really scared of losing a trade. And so when you're a front office that scared of losing a trade, and keep in mind it's a new front office right now in Sacramento, and if you're that afraid of losing a trade and looking dumb in front of your fan base, I don't know, things tend not to happen, but or happen slowly. So we'll see what happens there. Manny writes in, anything to move Rozier. Yeah, I get it. That's why I mentioned the buyout situation. I wouldn't rule it out. Just a thought, no reporting on it. Please don't aggregate me. Would moving Duncan Robinson off the books and signing Jonathan Kuminga put Miami in the first apron? So this part is really interesting. It could potentially. This is why I mentioned that you're probably going to need multiple teams, more than just Golden State and Miami involved in a potential Kuminga to Miami sign and trade situation there. If you move Duncan off the books, potentially use his deal in a sign and trade that goes to Golden State or a third team or whatever, Kuminga would be, let's say, I'm going to use a round number. I have no idea what let's call it $30 million that Kuminga signs for, agrees to as a restricted free agent. That's the offer that Miami puts there. Everybody agrees. That's the deal that we're talking about. $30 million. Just nice round number. I have no idea what the Kuminga number might be. There's a couple of ways that you could do this. It could be a Duncan Robinson piece that moves somewhere else. Wiggins goes back to Golden State, for example. And then Kuminga comes here, and that would keep Miami under the first apron. If Miami gets Jonathan Kuminga, they're going to do it in a way that keeps them under the first apron. This is not a team that wants to pay the luxury tax. Not just the first apron, the luxury tax. Miami, I think, is interested in Kuminga. I don't think they view Kuminga as we have to have this guy, and we're willing to pay the luxury tax for this guy. So there's ways to do it, but it's going to involve multiple teams, and that's why I think things will be pretty slow rolling on there. Lewis writes in, please no more Duncan, white flag, he can't defend. I get it. And this is Duncan Robinson is one of my favorite players in the locker room to talk to. I think he's incredibly insightful and incredibly generous with his time with the media and all these things. I understand though why Heat fans are ready to move on from him, because he's a guy who routinely gets played off the floor in the postseason. And even in the regular season, as great of a shooter as he is, all-time leader in three-point shooting in Miami Heat history, there's a lot of regular season value there. There tends to not be, over the last couple of seasons, a lot of postseason value there. And if you're going to be spending $20 million like they have the last couple of years, or $10 million potentially on a theoretical new contract, you'd like that player to be a factor in what you're doing in the playoffs. I could see that working in Detroit. They have a ton of versatile defensive wings. Cade Cunningham can hold his own defensively a little bit. At least he's got the potential to do it. But it's really hard to play Duncan Robinson with Tyler Hero. It's hard to play Duncan Robinson in certain lineups. And because of that, he has a little bit less utility in Miami than he did when it first started happening there. So I get it. And I understand why you might not want to commit to a long-term contract there for Duncan Robinson. So we'll see what ends up happening there. Is the Kuminga thing real? Why would Golden State give up on a promising young player like that? What are you hearing? I think the Kuminga thing is real. I think the Warriors have decided that Kuminga doesn't work for them. And it's not necessarily that they're trying to it's not necessarily that they would be giving up on Jonathan Kuminga. It's that they don't want to sign Jonathan Kuminga to another huge contract. They're paying Steph Curry a bunch of money. They're paying Jimmy Butler a bunch of money, $50 million plus per season for both of those players, each of those players. Draymond Green is making a pretty big salary, around $30 million. So it's not that they are giving up on Kuminga, although you could argue that Steve Kerr already gave up on Jonathan Kuminga by not playing him in the playoffs. But there's a lot of money that's getting tied to Jonathan Kuminga here potentially. And if they can turn that slot into somebody who could play with Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green, because right now in Golden State, Kuminga can't play with Draymond and Jimmy Butler. That's three non-shooters, guys who teams don't respect from three-point range. It kills their spacing. It's one thing when Kuminga is on a rookie contract making $8 million or whatever it was. It's a different thing when he's making $30 million plus or whatever he's going to make on this next contract. So it just makes sense for the Warriors to move on. Now, don't rule out the Warriors not finding a deal that they like, throwing the money at Kuminga anyway, and then trying to find a trade in the middle of the season before the trade deadline. Don't rule that out. Don't rule that out. But I do think it's trending in a direction where both sides would like, between Golden State and Kuminga, both sides would like to have a resolution to this, and Golden State can go into next season feeling like they have a roster that they like, because they went into last year having 12, 13, 14 guys who they liked, but also knowing that they were going to make a trade midseason, that there was just too many guys. They needed a consolidation trade, and that they wanted to go after somebody, maybe not Jimmy Butler at the time, but a star at the caliber of Jimmy Butler. And they ended up obviously trading a bunch of those pieces in to go get Jimmy Butler. So I don't think that the Warriors want to kind of do that whole song and dance of, we have this roster, but we know it's not going to be the roster by the trade deadline. I think they'd rather have their roster pretty much set by the beginning of the season, but I don't think that they're going to just give Kuminga away for nothing just to accomplish that either. But I do think that there's real motivation for both Kuminga and Golden State to move on and figure out what their next step can be. Let's find another question here, or a comment. Drew is back. Yeah. Hasn't been talked about a lot, I feel like, locally, but Miami did make Drew Smith a restricted free agent. I'll go out on a limb and say market's not going to be super robust for Drew Smith as a restricted free agent. I don't think that you're going to see a whole lot of teams calling up Drew Smith's agent and being like, we're ready to make a big offer that Miami's just not going to be willing to match. They could bring Drew Smith back as a two-way player. I think that's sort of the idea here. We'll see what happens. Josh Christopher not coming back. Isaiah Stevens not coming back. Miami will probably fill these two-way spots, whether it's Drew Smith or not, but they're going to fill these two-way spots with some of these players that they signed as undrafted free agents. So I think Summer League is going to be very, very competitive for Miami. Should we at least call for Chris Paul? I don't see the point. Again, had Miami actually made the move for Kevin Durant, Chris Paul, Al Horford, these guys make sense. They're aging stars who are ready to win right now. tail end of their careers, whatever. I'm not here to debate the efficacy of that strategy. I just think in terms of actually giving Chris Paul a call, I probably wouldn't do it. Although I do like the idea of having a veteran point guard there to help Kasparis Yakuchonis, the Heat's first-round pick, kind of figure out life as an NBA point guard. Because right now, there's not really anybody in that locker room for him to learn from in terms of high-level point guard play. I like the idea of bringing somebody in who can do that. But it sounds like Chris Paul wants to stay on the West Coast, and I don't see him coming to Miami, especially with this roster without somebody like Kevin Durant or somebody that he could play off of. Do you think Kuminga is worth a trade, or should the Heat just take this as a gap year? I think you can do both. I don't think Kuminga is ready to win right now. He's still super raw. I don't think that's a guy who moves the needle for you this season. He's a guy that you take a swing on as a second draft guy. Didn't work in Golden State because a ton of it was the wrong fit. I argued it when the Warriors drafted him. Like, it was like, this is a terrible pick. Like, I like Kuminga as a talent. I don't like him at all as a fit in Golden State. He just doesn't work with Steph Curry. But this is a guy who wants to get his shots. I think you could do both, right? I think you could sign and trade for Kuminga, give him the rock, let him explore all the corners of his game and figure it all out. It's probably going to look a lot like what Jordan Poole in Washington looked like the last couple of years, where it's like, it's not always pretty, it's not always efficient, but he's getting shots up and he's figuring it out, and we're all going to figure out who Jonathan Kuminga is as a player. There's a chance that it pops, right? Kuminga is a top 1% athlete. Like, he's an elite talent. When you just talk about talent, he's got all of it, the physical attributes, athleticism, all of it. But Golden State had to beg him to rebound, had to beg him to defend, had to beg him to play within a system. That's going to be a big learning curve, even in Miami. Even if he gets more of an opportunity than he did in Golden State, he's still going to have to figure out how to fit in Miami. And he proved in his time in Golden State, it just takes him a little while to figure that kind of stuff out in terms of his fit. But you can just give him the rock and let him figure it out for a whole season, deal with some of the uncomfortable learning curves and the growing pains and all that. Maybe you lose a bunch of games. Miami has their pick next year. They have their pick for 2026. Maybe it ends up in the lottery while you're figuring out who Jonathan Kuminga is as a player. I actually think trading for Jonathan Kuminga is sort of a gap year strategy. And not a bad one, right? You're getting younger. You're accumulating talent. I think that's something that makes sense. I'd be interested in Benedict Mathurin. Me too. I don't know that Indiana wants to move him. I think that they actually prefer to see what he can do as a potential starter while Tyrese Halliburton is out. If they are forced to move somebody, maybe it's TJ McConnell. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense for Miami. Maybe it is Benedict Mathurin. I think they would like to keep him. I don't think he's off limits. I also don't think Miami has the stuff to go get Benedict Mathurin. Why spend money on Nickeil Alexander when he's not that much better than Highsmith or Jaime Jaquez Jr.? Focus on Kuminga. I say both. Why not? Why not both potentially? I don't know that they could do it. I shouldn't have said that. Spoke too soon. Nickeil Alexander Walker, though, is much better than Haywood Highsmith and Jaime Jaquez Jr. Have you heard anything on the Heat interested in Russell Westbrook? No. I haven't heard anything in terms of them being there or interested in Russell Westbrook. Anything on an Andrew Wiggins trade from Raymond Forbes? We don't know what's happening here. I will say this. Miami is open to trading Andrew Wiggins. I think they have taken phone calls on Andrew Wiggins. They're not going to move Andrew Wiggins just to move Andrew Wiggins. But I do think if you're looking at a team right now with 14 players under contract, we'll see what happens with Duncan Robinson, but potentially 15 players under contract. The only way to really shake the roster up is to move one or two of these players, Andrew Wiggins, Terry Rozier. I think the Heat are exploring options on both of those players. They won't move them just to move them. I think they actually value the fact that Rozier's contract is expiring. I don't think they're going to, as much as Heat fans don't want Rozier on the roster, I think the Heat are okay with Rozier being on the roster because the money comes off the books and could potentially be used as an expiring salary at the trade deadline when maybe something that they actually like shows up. So keep that in mind. And did we just re-sign somebody? Sorry, there's a Florida Panthers thing. Brad Marchand coming back to the Florida Panthers. Brief hockey update. Go Panthers. Love that move. Hopefully Miami can make some similar type of moves. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Don't think they're going to move anybody just to move them, but I do think that they will try to do something. Wes, what do you think Miami's biggest target should be in free agency? I think they just need a high-level rotation player. That's why I like Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I don't know that I have a position in mind necessarily. There's not a point guard. I would love this team to go get a legitimate point guard. I don't think there's anybody in free agency that makes a ton of sense that I would make my number one priority. There's plenty of point guards I like. Trey Jones, it sounds like he's going back to Chicago. I don't know if that's done or not, but I liked him. Tyus Jones could make some sense. I know Miami had interest in the past. Tyus Jones had interest in him in the past. Not sure. I think Tyus Jones could maybe get a starting job somewhere else. I don't know that that makes sense in Miami. I like Maxi Kleber as a restricted free agent. The one thing that Miami does have here, if they do nothing, and if they just don't do the Kuminga thing, and Duncan Robinson leaves, let's say Duncan Robinson signs with Detroit. Let's just call it Detroit. Let's say Duncan Robinson signs with Detroit. Miami has 14 players under contract. They're going to have about $12 million of space below the luxury tax line and multiple ways to use that. They can use that. Even though they don't have cap space, they have the smaller mid-level, the bigger mid-level exception, the biannual exception, and a Jimmy Butler trade exception that's worth $16 million. They have multiple ways that they can use that space. They are in position to go get a guy. So if Miami decides within the opening minutes of free agency, if you see Duncan Robinson sign somewhere else, Miami could zero in on a target very quickly. Very quickly. If that's what they want to do. And that doesn't mean that takes Jonathan Kuminga out of the equation. They could do something right now and figure out all the math later. It becomes a little bit more complicated at that point because you don't have as much room, but it doesn't become impossible. So if you watch Duncan Robinson, that is the first domino here. Sign Luke Kennard. Could be an option. I wouldn't give him the full mid-level. I'd probably give him a portion of the smaller mid-level. But if Miami specifically wants somebody to replace Duncan Robinson, Luke Kennard at least fits. I mentioned Sam Hauser before. You could just absorb his contract, do Boston a favor in terms of reducing payroll, and just get something done right now. But again, I don't know that if you're losing Duncan Robinson, that you're looking to replace Duncan Robinson with a similarly priced player. Maybe you can use a veteran minimum. But again, if you're only dealing with one open roster spot, this is why I never really understood bringing back Kashad Johnson. I like Kashad Johnson. You couldn't just waive him and bring him back on a two-way contract. That was always a little curious to me because you guaranteed his money for next year right away. That could have been an open roster spot. I don't really understand what they were trying to do there with Kashad Johnson. I thought for sure waive him, let him clear waivers, sign him back on a two-way contract. Because the only reason he was on the roster last year was because Drew Smith got hurt. Drew Smith was going to get that 15th roster spot, and he got hurt, and then they had to fill the spot, or the 14th roster spot. They had to fill the spot, and so they just promoted Kashad Johnson. It was right place, right time kind of thing. I like Kashad. He has shown zero at the NBA level for him to have a guaranteed roster spot for next season, but they did it anyway. What else here? I don't think that's fair. Come on. Be nice to Cody Martin. He likes Miami. I remember watching Cody Martin. Cody Martin used to visit the Heat when he was playing for Charlotte, and obviously they were not in the playoffs during the 2023 playoff run. And Cody Martin used to come to every home game and cheer on Caleb Martin from courtside seats. And I just thought it was really, really cool of Cody Martin. He would be in the locker room or not in the locker room. He'd be outside the locker room after all of those games, got to know the team a little bit, and spent a lot of time in Miami. I live here in Brickell, and I used to walk around during that year and just see Caleb Martin and Cody Martin just walking around with their sunglasses on together, and I couldn't figure out which one was which. And they kind of just reminded me of the twins from Breaking Bad, the way they just like would walk around in lockstep in Mara Brickell Village and stuff like that. So I thought that's a little story for you there. We need another point guard. I think that they could definitely use a backup point guard. I just don't know who makes a ton of sense there. But Jordan Clarkson does make some sense. Raymond Forbes, a lot of stuff here. I like all your things. Sam Hauser idea is wholesome and spicy. Wholesome is funny. Spicy, definitely. Derek White to Miami. A boy can dream. Keep dreaming. Don't see that happening. Again, I don't know that they go. I don't know that they go like for like. I don't know that they try to replace Duncan Robinson with another Duncan Robinson. Although I do think Sam Hauser would make some sense there. But I just think that there's some other options. I'm not a Kuminga guy, dude. I get it. If you're not a Kuminga guy, that's fair. Frankly, I don't know how you watch Jonathan Kuminga this past season and feel really confident in Jonathan Kuminga. Golden State certainly did not. So, like, this is a guy who doesn't have a go-to move offensively, has to kind of play in the open court. Kind of a loose dribble, not a great shooter, wants to take a bunch of mid-range shots. When you get him to cut and do all the backdoor stuff and dunk, he's incredible. But it just felt like Steve Kerr always had to beg him to do the things that he wanted to do. Jonathan Kuminga wants to be Kobe Bryant. I wrote a story on Jonathan Kuminga his rookie year in Golden State. And he told me that he used to find money, walk to the internet cafe in his town, and use his money to just watch YouTube highlights of Kobe Bryant. This guy idolizes. He wants to be Kobe. He wants to do the mid-range spin move. He works on it all the time. It's what he wants to do. Golden State obviously didn't have room for that. Frankly, I don't know that Miami has a ton of room for it, although I'd be interested in experimenting with it and trying. But I don't know anybody that just sees Jonathan Kuminga as like, yep, that's the answer. Because I don't know how you watch him these last couple of years and believe that. You could be the biggest Kuminga fan in the world, right? And I'm not anti the deal. I'm just saying, like, it's risky, man. Like, even getting him at $30 million is a little risky. So basically, the Kings are the Heat of the West Coast. LOL. It's funny. I heard Ryan Russillo say that this morning, or maybe it was the opposite, like the Heat or the Kings or whatever. They kind of like them together in terms of not having a plan. That seemed a little harsh to me. Where's Kyle Anderson in the mix of all this? So Kyle Anderson is also a guy with an interesting contract situation too. His contract next year is non-guaranteed. For this, I'll clarify that. For this upcoming season, he's under contract guaranteed $9 million. 2026, 2027, it's non-guaranteed for $9-10 million, something like that. That makes him an interesting trade candidate. It also makes him a player that Miami can just keep. I think they like Kyle Anderson fine. He was definitely a throw-in the Butler trade. I don't think that they went out of their way to go get Kyle Anderson. In fact, they tried to trade Kyle Anderson after in the Butler deal, in that deal. But I think they like him fine. I kind of like Kyle Anderson as a backup center. Like in a Nick, but like the way the Clippers used Nick Batum last year as a backup 4-5. So when I kind of write down my depth chart, every once in a while I experiment. I'm like, what if Kyle Anderson just gave you 5, 6, 7 minutes a night as a small ball 5? And you just went small ball lineups. And that could make sense with Kuminga on the roster, or even like Jovic or something like that playing the 4. That could be pretty interesting. But Kyle Anderson on the roster right now, he could potentially be used as a piece to go get a player that fits a little bit better. He's probably behind Jovic. I think Miami would prefer that Nico get those minutes over Kyle Anderson, which is why I kind of like, can he play center? Because I don't know that I like Nico playing center. Give me some insight on Westbrook. Sorry if I missed it earlier. I don't see it happening. Let's see here. Is Jaden Ivey a possibility? Low asset. This is a guy who's very interesting and I keep coming back to. He's got one more year left on his rookie contract. Detroit doesn't seem to love him. Gets injured. Whatever. Duncan Robinson or Jaden Ivey? Does that make sense for Detroit? Probably not. I feel like Detroit could just use their cap space and not do that, or use it on Luke Kennard or somebody like that and keep the asset. But Jaden Ivey's interesting. I like Jaden Ivey. I liked him a lot coming out of the draft, and I liked what he did last year before getting hurt. I wouldn't mind it. I don't know if that's necessarily what's going to happen. Will Vlad Golden end up being the backup big? This is the undrafted free agent that they signed out of Michigan. Big 7-foot Russian guy. A lot of skill there. Was one of the top undrafted free agents on the market when Miami picked him up. Is he going to end up being the backup big? I think he could end up certainly being the one of the two-way spots and maybe get some minutes there. I like it. Let's see what else. Gershon Yabusele for the mid-level exception. I like Yabusele. I don't love him as a fit in Miami. Mid-level, maybe. I wouldn't hate it. Just really feels like they need Nico to fill that backup 4 spot, doesn't it? Really feels like he's got to make that leap. Bradley Beal and a first from Phoenix for Wiggs and Rozier. Still has a no trade clause. That probably still comes over. I've seen that floated. Was it Zach Lowe maybe who floated it? I don't know. I don't love it. Cam Whitmore over Kuminga. I love Cam Whitmore. Similar players in that they don't love to pass the ball, that they're very much looking to call their own number, all this kind of stuff. But Cam Whitmore was almost involved in the trade from the Kevin Durant trade. He might be playing in Phoenix right now. Instead, Houston decided that they wanted, or Phoenix rather decided that they wanted 5 second-round picks. They wanted all those second-round picks as opposed to Cam Whitmore. But if I think Cam Whitmore is available, that's another second draft guy that I would like. Now, is there a Kyle Anderson from Cam Whitmore or something like that? A small contract for a smaller contract? Maybe that's something that's out there. I would like for Miami to take a chance on a guy like Cam Whitmore. This is what I'm talking about. Second draft guys. Take a chance on a talent. This is what I'm talking about. Is Marcus Smart or CJ McCollum an option? McCollum's tough to get to in terms of the salary number. He's making about $30 million. Even if you did a Rozier from McCollum swap, you're adding another $4 million onto Miami's books. I don't know that they want to do that. Marcus Smart is making $21 million. Rozier's making $27 million. I like Marcus Smart. And I think that could be an option. Marcus Smart wants to play for a contender. Now, I don't know that Miami is necessarily a contender. I also don't know how many contenders actually want Marcus Smart. I do know this. Miami is at least a contender to be a playoff team, and Washington definitely isn't, which is where Marcus Smart is now. Would Washington do Marcus Smart a solid and Marcus Smart's agency and representation a solid and say, you know what, we'll just do it. Marcus Smart for Terry Rozier. Maybe Miami throws in a second-round pick. Just swap them out. We don't really care either way. We're going to be losing. Terry Rozier actually might make more sense for us anyway than Marcus Smart does. Maybe with a little bit more rope here, he builds up his trade value, has a bounce-back year, change of scenery, and then we can move him by the deadline. Because I don't think Marcus Smart has a ton of value right now in Washington, and I don't think he will because he's just super unmotivated right now playing for a lousy Wizards team. But Marcus Smart in Miami, I like him as a Davion Mitchell backup. And then you have Mitchell and you have Marcus Smart as these point of attack type of similar point guards. I like it. Let's see. We're starting to run out of time here, but let's see. Do you think Spo and the coaching staff could fix him or Cam Whitmore? I think is him Jonathan Kuminga. Yeah, I love this. I love this developmental staff, and whether or not they can or not, these are the kind of risks that Miami hasn't necessarily taken in the past. And I think these second draft guys with a ton of talent, these are the kinds of guys who you bring in, refurbish, shine them up a little bit, get them into the Miami's development program, see what they can become, and whether they become rotation pieces, staples for you later on, foundational pieces for you later on, or potential trade pieces later on. That's the way you build assets. It's the way that you increase your roster flexibility. It's the way that you get in on some of these other trades that they're not in on and haven't been on over these last couple of years. All right, let's see. I'm going to try to get maybe a couple more here. I'm seeing a lot of people keep asking about Kuminga, Russell Westbrook, some of these other guys, John Collins. I covered it. I'm sorry if you missed it. I covered a bunch of that stuff already. Larry Markkinen as a name. I wonder what Larry Markkinen thinks of all this stuff. I think Utah is up to something. I don't know if that means that they're going to trade Larry Markkinen. I don't know that Miami makes a ton of sense for Larry Markkinen. Again, you've got Bam, you've got Khalil Ware. You could play Larry Markkinen at the 3. We saw him do it in Cleveland. Is that his best spot? I don't know. It also cost you something to get Larry. Wiggins in Utah, there's a bunch of trade constructions that work. Maybe multiple teams. Just calling that out. I don't know that anything's going to happen there, but all right. All right. I had a bunch of stuff. I got another question about DeAndre Ayton. I talked about that a few minutes ago. Free agency is going to start in about half an hour. David and I are going to be back shortly after that to recap everything that happened. I was going to go for 30 minutes. I ended up going for almost an hour here. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. I'm going to end it there. Thanks for jumping on for the live stream. Those are the latest updates. Quick reminder, just a couple of things to just remind you right off the top as we get into free agency here. The number one thing that you want to be watching for right away within the first minute or so, Duncan Robinson. What happens there? Does he sign somewhere else, or does he come back to Miami on a team-friendly deal with a couple more years tacked on? It's the first thing that you're looking for. If he comes back, Miami's at 15 players. The only way that Miami can make any improvements on the roster at that point, I would be watching Andrew Wiggins. I would be watching Terry Rozier as trade guys. I mentioned the potential for a Terry Rozier buyout earlier. Don't think it's on the top of Miami's list, but you're seeing a lot of guys get bought out. DeAndre Ayton, Jordan Clarkson. I think buyouts are becoming a little bit more common in the NBA. You could still do it and have enough money to potentially make a move with the mid-level exception, even if you bring Duncan Robinson back. If Duncan Robinson leaves, Miami is going to have a big portion of their mid-level exception that they can use, and they could potentially do something quickly. So I think that there is a chance that Miami does something tonight if Duncan Robinson signs somewhere else. So that's the first dominoes, the Duncan Robinson part. Miami right now, finances, quick just refresher on that. With Duncan Robinson not under contract, they are $11.6 million under the luxury tax. They are not going to pay the luxury tax. So they're $11.6 million under the luxury tax right now. That's the amount of space that they have. So if Duncan Robinson comes back, it'll be for a figure less than 11.6. If they go sign another player, as the roster is currently constructed, something less than 11.6. The Jonathan Kuminga thing is real. We'll see. I don't know how motivated Miami is, but I know that they are showing interest. That's something that's probably going to be a little bit slower because it's so complicated in these restricted free agent sign-in trades for a lot of different reasons. If you want more information, it's a lot of numbers and CBA mumbo jumbo. I talked a little about it earlier, but Google it. If you're really interested in Kuminga, go ahead and Google it. There's a lot of stuff about salary matching, how Kuminga's Jonathan Kuminga base year salary. If you really want to figure out how that sign and trade works, because it gets very complicated. So that Jonathan Kuminga base year salary or sign and trade base year salary, Google that, and you'll get a little bit more insight into why I'm talking about why it's so complicated. But that's better for you to read than me to try to explain on a podcast, because that's just bad radio. I think Miami can have interest in several different free agent targets. I think Nickeil Alexander-Walker does make sense. I like Maxi Kleber. I think Memphis would like to keep him, but they're also trying to shed money. Who knows what happens there? But I think there's other names that could potentially make some sense too. That's it for now. Very excited. Free agency starts 6 p.m. We're not going to be away that long. This was supposed to be a half-hour long stream. Went for an hour. I hope this was informative. I hope this helped. We'll see what happens. David and I will be back shortly after we get some of this news happening. Free agency starting 6 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for tuning in.